You are going to die broke and alone, Ruth. Somebody in this family has to say it, so I will say it to your face. That is how my son-in-law opened what he called a family budget meeting. On a warm Sunday afternoon, at the very dining table where I had once fed him his first plate in my home. Trevor said it with a small, practiced smile, the smile of a man who has decided that cruelty is only honesty with the good manners taken off. He let the words sit there in the quiet, over the good china, so they would have room to land. Then he slid a folder of papers across the table toward me, turned so I could read my own name printed along the top line, and he told me that all I had to do was sign, and he would take the worry off my hands forever. I did not pick up the pen. What Trevor did not know, what not a single soul in that room knew that afternoon, was that I was already holding the one thing he had spent 2 years trying to smile me out of. And in a season not far off, a room full of strangers I had never met would say my worth out loud, in real dollars, and place it back into my 2 hands so that I could rise. My name is Ruth Calloway. I am 63 years old, though the woman at the church always tells me my face has not read my birth certificate yet, and I let her flatter me, because a little flattery on a Sunday never hurt anybody. Before I tell you the whole of it, I want to ask you something, and I mean it as a friend and not as a habit. Tell me in the comments where you are watching from tonight, and how old you were when you first learned that a person can say kind words to your face and cold words behind your back, and mean the cold ones. And if you believe, as I have come to believe, that no man alive gets to set the price on your worth, that only the good Lord holds that pen, then stay with me to the end of this story and go on and subscribe, because what happened at that dining table was only the setup. It was not the payoff. Now let me set the table properly for you, the way it was before Trevor ever knocked on my door. For 40 years I ran a dress and alterations shop on Main Street, in the same brick building my late husband and I bought when we were young enough to be foolish and stubborn enough to make foolishness work. Calloway's, the sign said. In gold letters my Elijah painted himself on a ladder that wobbled while I held the bottom and prayed. Elijah has been gone 11 years now. He was a deacon and a mail carrier and the only man I ever loved, and he used to say that a straight hem and a straight ledger were the same virtue wearing 2 different dresses. I believed him. For 40 years I kept both of them straight. I want you to understand what that shop was, because Trevor never once understood it. And his misunderstanding is the whole engine of what I am about to tell you. It was not a rich woman's business. I never drove a fine car. But every wedding gown for 3 generations of families on that side of town passed through my hands. I let out the seams on Sunday suits when men put on weight and prosperity at the same time. I took in the dresses of widows who had lost weight and everything else in a single hard winter. I did the alteration, and I did the listening, because a woman standing on a fitting stool in her slip will tell you the truth about her life, and I learned early that the listening was the real trade, and the sewing was only what I charged for. And I tithe every week, off the top, before the light bill and before the thread. I gave the first 10th to the church, because my mother did it and her mother did it, and the 2 of them died with clean names, and not much else. And I decided a clean name was the inheritance I wanted to leave. 40 years of ledgers, written by hand, every dollar in and every dollar out, the good weeks and the lean ones, and not one crooked line in the whole stack. That stack of books is going to matter later. Hold on to it in your mind the way I held on to it in my closet. The building was paid off. I want to be plain about that, because it is the thing everyone forgets. My Elijah and I burned that mortgage in the backyard on a Juneteenth, and the 2 of us danced in the grass like children, and the deed sat clear in my name from that day to this one. No note, no lien, no man's signature required, but mine, a paid-off brick building on Main Street, in a town that was just beginning to talk about coming back to life. That was what Trevor smelled when he came courting my daughter, though it took me longer than it should have to understand that a man can court the daughter and appraise the mother in the very same visit. I closed the shop 4 years ago. I mean to say that part myself, before anyone else says it for me. Because there is a version of this story where I am a failure, and I refuse to hand you that version. I did not go broke. I closed because my knees and my eyes and the big new outlet mall on the highway all sat me down at the same table and made their case, and I was tired, and Elijah was gone, and for a while I let tired win. I locked the door. I kept the deed. I kept the ledgers. I kept the dress form and the good German shears and the bolts of fabric I could not bear to sell, and I told myself the rest was in the Lord's hands. I thought I was finished. That is not the same as being finished. It took me 4 years and one cruel Sunday to learn the difference. My daughter is named Simone. She is 34 and she is the best thing Elijah and I ever made, and I am going to tell you some hard things about her in this story, so let me first tell you the true thing. She is not a wicked woman. She is a tired woman who married a loud man and mistook the loudness for strength, and by the time the meeting at my table happened, she had spent 6 years learning to go quiet whenever her husband got loud. She has a little girl of her own now, my granddaughter Imani, who is 6 and calls me Gigi, and does not yet know that grown people can sit at a table and eat pie and cut each other to pieces with a smile. I would like to keep her from learning that as long as I can. And Trevor, my son-in-law, Trevor, I will try to be fair to him, because bitterness is a bad seasoning and I have watched it ruin better cooks than me. Trevor sold what he called financial strategy, and he was good at the selling and, as it turned out, terrible at the strategy. He wore a nice watch and drove a leased car that he talked about as if he owned it, which I have come to believe is a fair picture of the whole man. From the first family dinner, he took over every conversation that had a dollar sign in it. He would wave his fork and explain compound interest to me, as though I had not balanced a business by hand for 4 decades. I let him. A wise woman my mother's age once told me that you learn more from a man who thinks you are a fool than from one who is trying to impress you, and Trevor thought I was a fool from the day we met. So Trevor taught me a great deal. So now you know the table, and everybody sitting around it. Let me take you back to that Sunday and let you sit in the empty chair beside me, because I want you to hear it happen, and not just hear me describe it. He had called it a meeting, but he had planned it like an ambush. He waited until Imani was down for her nap. He waited until Simone had cleared the plates and poured the coffee, and had both her hands full so she could not easily reach for mine. Then, he laid the folder on the table, squared its edges with 2 fingers, and cleared his throat as though he were about to bless the food a second time. "Ruth," he said, "we need to have a grown-up conversation about your situation." I did not know my situation had grown a problem, I said. It was resting comfortably the last time I checked on it. He smiled the smile. That's exactly the attitude I mean. You joke, but the numbers don't joke. You're a widow with no income, sitting on a dead building, spending down whatever your husband left. You've got maybe what? A few good years before it all runs out. And then what? You come live in Simone's spare room? You become her problem? Her daughter's problem? Trevor, Simone said from over by the counter. Just his name. Soft. It was not a defense. It was the sound a woman makes when she has learned that saying more will cost her the whole evening. No, she needs to hear it, he said, not even turning around. Somebody in this family has to be the adult. Then he looked back at me, and he laid it down like a card he had been holding all night. "You're going to die broke and alone, Ruth. That's just math. Unless you let me help you." I have been called things in my life. I grew up in a time and a town that had a great deal of practice in calling a black woman anything but her name. So I have some experience with the moment when a person hands you an insult and waits, hungry, to watch it do its work on your face. I have learned to make my face a still pond. I folded my hands on the table, and I looked at him, and I let the pond stay still, and I said, "All right, show me the help." That was when he opened the folder. It was a debt consolidation agreement, he called it, and he walked me through it as a man walks you through a card trick, fast on the part that matters. There was a new company he had started, some kind of investment fund, and it needed what he called collateral to unlock a much larger line of financing. And my little brick building on Main Street, free and clear as it was, would be, in his words, the cornerstone that makes the whole structure bankable. I would sign the building into the arrangement. In exchange, the family, meaning Trevor, would take over the taxes and the upkeep, and I would never have to worry about money for the rest of my days. He said that last part gently, like a gift. "And the building?" I asked. "Whose name is on it after I sign?" "It goes into the holding entity," he said, "for protection. It's actually safer that way." "Safer for whom?" He blinked. For 1 second the smile slipped, and I saw the thing underneath it, and the thing underneath it was afraid. I have thought about that second many times since. A man does not get afraid over a favor. A man gets afraid over a lifeline. But the smile came back so fast I almost doubted my own eyes. "Ruth, I'm trying to save you from yourself," he said. "That building is worthless to you. It's been sitting empty for years. You can't run a shop, you're not well enough. The mall took that whole business, and honestly, nobody wants a little tailor on Main Street anymore. It's a dead asset. I'm offering to turn a dead asset into your security. Any financial professional would tell you the same thing. I'm sure they would," I said, "if you were the one paying them to say it." Simone made a small sound at the counter, half a laugh, quickly swallowed. Trevor's jaw tightened. He tapped the signature line with one manicured finger, twice. Patient. A man tapping the top of a fence post he expects a slow animal to eventually notice. "Just sign, Ruth. Make it easy on everybody. Make it easy on your daughter." And there it was, the real knife, slid in soft. "Make it simple for your daughter." As if my refusing to hand my life's one clear possession to a man I did not trust was a burden I was choosing to lay on Simone's back. I looked at my girl then. She was staring down into the coffee pot she was pretending to clean, and she would not lift her eyes to me. And in that moment she looked exactly like her father used to look, when he had done something he was ashamed of, and I loved her so much it hurt me in the chest. "I am going to take these papers home," I said, standing up and gathering the folder before he could stop me. "And I mean to pray on them, and I intend to have a person I trust read every line. And then I will give you my answer." "What person?" Trevor said, and there was an edge in it now. "You don't have a lawyer. Who are you going to have read it, your pastor?" "Maybe I will," I said. "Reverend Hollis has read harder scripture than yours and found the trap in it every time." I kissed my sleeping granddaughter on the forehead. I told my daughter I loved her and got no answer that I could hear. And I drove myself home in the quiet, with a folder of paper on the seat beside me that a man wanted me to believe was a gift, and that I already knew. In the deep place where the Lord and I do our real business was a hook with the bait still warm on it. I did not sleep that night. I will be truthful about the cost of things. I sat up in my kitchen with the folder open under the light, and I read every word twice, and the more I read, the colder my hands got. Because Trevor had made one mistake. He had assumed that a woman who kept books by hand for 40 years could not read a balance sheet. But the language of money is the language of money, whether it wears a fine suit or an apron. And buried in the back pages of his gift, in the small print he clearly did not expect me to reach, was the truth of it. His new company was not raising money. It was drowning in it. He had borrowed against borrowings. The whole shining structure he had described was already cracked straight down the middle, and my paid-off building was not going to be the cornerstone of anything. It was going to be the last dry log he threw on a fire that was already burning his house down, so that he could stay warm one more season while everything I had built went up as smoke. I closed the folder. I turned off the light, and in the dark of my own kitchen, in the house my husband and I had paid for, with straight hems and straight ledgers, I did not feel afraid anymore. I felt something I had not felt in the 4 years since I locked the shop door. I felt awake. The next morning I did something I had not done in a long time. I drove to Main Street and I stood in front of my own shop. The gold letters had faded to the color of weak tea. Someone had taped a flyer for a lost dog in my window, and the tape had gone yellow, and the dog, I hoped, had long since found its way home. Through the dusty glass I could see the shapes of my old life under white sheets, the fitting stool, the long counter, the dress form standing patient in the corner like a woman waiting for a bus that was never late in coming, but was very late that day. I put my key in the lock. The key still turned. A building that is truly dead does not let your key turn. I need you to remember that, because Trevor kept using that word. Dead, dead asset. And a thing is not dead just because a man with a nice watch has stopped being able to imagine it alive. Inside it smelled as it always smelled, of cotton and chalk and old wood and the ghost of my mother's rosewater, and I stood in the middle of that hush, and I did not cry, though I had given myself permission to. Instead, I pulled the sheet off the counter, and I opened the drawer, and there they were, the ledgers. 40 years of them, cloth-bound, stacked like bricks, each one dated on the spine in Elijah's blocky hand for the years he was alive, and my rounder hand for the years he was not. I lifted the oldest one, and I opened it, and I read the first entry either of us ever made in that shop. A hem taken up for a woman named Pearl, 40 cents, paid, and under it in my husband's writing the words that were his private joke and his creed all at once. Honest work, honest book. I stood there a long time with that little book in my hands, and something began to move in me that I can only call a plan, though at the time it did not feel like a plan. It felt like the shop breathing. If Trevor thought this building was worthless, then Trevor had told me exactly how much he understood about worth, which was nothing. And a man who understands nothing about worth should not be allowed to price my life. The building was not collateral for his sinking ship. The building was my trade. It was standing right there, waiting, and I was not too old, and my hands were not too tired. And the outlet mall on the highway did not know one single thing about how to fit a grieving widow for the dress she would bury her husband in. But I did. I did not tell anybody yet. I locked the shop back up. I took 3 of the ledgers home with me, and I called Reverend Hollis. Pastor Hollis has shepherded our congregation for 22 years, and he is the kind of man who reads a contract the same slow way he reads Scripture. One finger under the line, lips barely moving, missing nothing. He came by on the Tuesday evening with his glasses and his own yellow pad, and he sat at my kitchen table where the trouble had started, and he read Trevor's folder cover to cover, without saying one word. And when he was done, he took his glasses off and rubbed the 2 red marks they leave on the side of his nose, and he looked at me for a while. "Ruth," he said, "who wrote this for that boy?" He said he wrote it himself. Then that boy is either a liar or a drowning man, and I have buried enough of both to tell you they wear the same face. He tapped the back pages, the small print, the part I had found in the dark. You see this? This clause here? If you sign this, and his fund defaults, and Ruth, this fund is going to default. This reads like it was written by a man already smelling the smoke. If you sign, your building doesn't protect you. It gets pulled into the bankruptcy along with everything else. They would sell it on the courthouse steps to pay his creditors, and you would stand in the crowd and watch strangers bid on your husband's gold letters. I had known it in my stomach. It is a different thing to hear it in a good man's voice across your own table. I nodded, slow. I am not going to sign it, I said. No, he said. You are not. Then he leaned back, and he studied me as he does from the pulpit when he is about to turn a corner in his sermon that the congregation has not seen coming. Ruth, you came in the shop yesterday, didn't you? Dolores saw you standing out front on Main Street, and she called me. Worried you'd taken a spell. I took a spell, all right, I said. I took the spell of remembering who I am. He smiled at that, a real smile, the first true smile anybody had aimed at me all week. Then let me put something in front of you, since you're already standing on the corner remembering. You know the city put out that Main Street money. The revitalization thing. They want the old storefronts open again. They've got a grant, real money, from the county and some foundation matching it, for folks who own a building downtown and have a plan to bring back a trade that serves the community. A committee decides. They're taking applications through the fall. He let that settle, as I had let my stillness settle at Trevor's table, so it would have room to land. You own a paid-off building at the end of Main Street, Ruth. You have got 40 years of honest books to prove you can run a shop that this town needed and will need again. If ever a program on this earth was written with one particular woman in mind, and did not know it yet, it is that one. I would like to tell you that I said yes right away, that faith made me bold in that instant. It did not. What I said was, committees do not give money to old women who close their shops. Reverend, committees give money to men with nice watches who know how to talk in meetings. And Pastor Hollis, who has known me since Elijah was alive, leaned across my table and said the thing that I have carried in my apron pocket every day since. Ruth Calloway, he said, you have spent 40 years believing the listening was the trade and the sewing was just what you charged for. You told Elijah that yourself, and he told me, because he was proud of you and could not keep it in. So let me ask you, if a committee of strangers sat you down and asked you to show them, in your own hand, 40 years of a woman keeping her word to a whole community, one honest line at a time, do you truly believe you would be the weakest person in that room? I did not answer him. But that night, after he left, I did not put the 3 ledgers back in the closet. I set them on the kitchen table, squared their edges with 2 fingers as Trevor had squared his folder, and I left them out where I would have to look at them in the morning. And I got down on my knees by my bed as my mother taught me, and I did not ask the Lord to win anything for me. I asked him only to keep my hands steady and my book straight and my mouth quiet, and to let me be brave enough to want the thing I wanted, which after 4 years of calling myself finished was the hardest prayer I had prayed since I buried my husband. If you have made it this far into my story, then you are the kind of person who already suspects how it ends, and you are staying anyway, because you want to see exactly how a quiet woman gets there. I understand that. I am the same kind of person. So let me show you the how. One honest line at a time, the only way I know to tell anything. I gave myself 2 weeks to be afraid, and then I put the fear down and picked up a pen. And I started to build my application the same way I used to build a wedding gown, from the inside out, with the seams that nobody sees done first and done right. I went down to the county building on a Monday morning in my good gray suit, the one I had made myself for Elijah's funeral and had worn to every serious occasion since. Because a woman should meet an institution dressed as she wants the institution to remember her. I asked the young man at the desk for everything they had on the Main Street Revitalization Grant, and he gave me a packet as thick as a phone book and looked at me like I was somebody's grandmother who had wandered in out of the heat, which I was, and which I let him think. Because being underestimated is a kind of privacy, and I have always done my best work in private. That packet was written to scare people off. I believe some of these things are written that way on purpose, so that only the folks bold enough or foolish enough to keep reading ever apply. There were requirements about business plans and financial projections and community impact statements and matching commitments. And there were words in there that I did not know. And I looked every one of them up at the library, sitting at a long table between a boy doing his homework and a man reading the newspaper want ads. And I wrote the meanings in the margins in pencil in my own hand until the scary packet was covered in my own plain language and did not scare me anymore. That is a trick my mother taught me about anything that comes dressed up to intimidate you. Make it speak your language. Write your words in its margins. It cannot look down on you once you have taught it to say your name. The heart of the application was the business plan. And here is where 40 years turned out to be worth more than any degree Trevor ever waved at me. They wanted to know if there was a need. I had 4 decades of a ledger telling me exactly who on that side of town needed a hem, a mend, a fitting, a Sunday suit let out, a wedding gown made from scratch because the ones in the stores were never cut for real women's bodies. They wanted to know if I could manage money. I had 40 years of books where every dollar could be walked from the day it came in the door to the day it went out, and not one of those dollars had ever gone missing. Because I had tithed the first 10th every single week, and a woman who gives God the first cut learns very fast to account for all the rest. They asked whether about community impact. I sat at my kitchen table and I wrote down, from memory, the names of the families whose most important days had passed through my hands, and I filled 4 pages. And I stopped not because I ran out of names, but because I ran out of the strength to keep reading them without weeping. And I decided a few tears on a Tuesday were nobody's business but mine. I priced everything out honest, what it would cost to bring the building up to code, to fix the wiring Elijah always meant to get to put in a ramp so that the older customers, my own generation now, could get through the door with their walkers and their grandbabies. I got real bids from real tradesmen, 3 each, as my Elijah taught me. Never trust the first number, and never trust the cheapest one. I built a budget down to the dollar, and it came to $250,000 to restore the building and reopen the trade and carry it through the first 2 lean years until it stood on its own feet. I wrote that figure out, and I looked at it, and my hand shook, because I had never in my life asked anyone for a fraction of that, and asking felt like a kind of nakedness. But I had learned something from Trevor's folder, ugly as it was. Money is only a language, and I had been fluent in it, quietly, for 40 years, in an apron, while a man in a nice suit assumed I could not read. While I built my seams in private, Trevor was not idle. He called. He called Simone Moore. He came by on a Thursday, uninvited, and found the county packet open on my kitchen table, and I watched him read the cover of it upside down, and I watched the smile come out like a knife wiping itself clean. "What is this?" he said, though he could plainly read what it was. "It's an application," I said. "I'm reopening the shop." He laughed. He actually put his head back and laughed, and it was worse than the insult at the dinner, because the insult had been aimed and this was just spilled. Careless. The honest overflow of a man who found the idea of me genuinely funny. Ruth. Come on. A grant? You think a committee is going to hand you $250,000 to sew dresses? Do you know how these things actually work? They go to people with connections. People who know how to package a deal, present it, work the room. No offense, but you're a retired seamstress. You don't even have a website. He shook his head, wiping his eye. Sign my paperwork, take the security, and let this little fantasy go before you embarrass yourself, before the whole town. I'm saying this because I love you. You have never once said you love me until you wanted my building, I said. Quiet, not unkind, just true. I have noticed that the two things always arrive together, like thunder and its lightning. The laugh went off his face. You're going to regret this stubbornness, he said. When that fund of mine goes public and triples, and you're still down here playing shopkeeper on a dead street, you're going to wish you'd listened to the one person who actually understood money in this family. Maybe, I said, and I walked him to the door. Because my mother passed to me that you can put a man out of your house with perfect manners, and he will not even feel the floor leave his feet until he is standing on the porch. Give my love to Simone. Tell her Amani left her good church shoes here, and I'll have them ready when she comes to get them. I closed the door, and through it, faint, I heard him say to the empty porch, to himself, the thing that told me everything about how frightened he truly was underneath the watch and the laugh. She's going to sink us, he said. She's going to sink all of us. Not she is going to embarrass herself. She is going to sink us. A man does not say us about a favor. He says it about a lifeboat. And I stood on my side of my paid-off door and understood, fully, for the first time, that my little dead building was the only thing between Trevor and the water. I finished the application over 6 weeks. I typed the parts that needed typing at the library, slow, with 2 fingers. And I hand-copied the ledger pages myself, rather than trust a machine to flatten Elijah's handwriting into gray. On the last Friday of September, I put it all into a hard-sided folder. Mine now. My own edges squared with my own 2 fingers, and I drove it down to the Main Street office myself, instead of mailing it, because 40 years of business taught me that you hand important things to a person, not to a slot. The revitalization office was a storefront 3 doors down from my own, one of the ones the program had already brought back to life, with new glass and a little bell over the door, and when I walked in, the woman behind the desk stood up to greet me, which is a small thing that told me a great deal. She was maybe 40, brown-skinned, in a blazer the color of a robin's egg, with reading glasses pushed up into her locks, and a way of looking at you full in the face that I liked immediately. The look of a person who has decided you are worth her whole attention, and not just the part that is waiting for you to leave. "Good morning," she said. "I'm Delia Foster. I run the program. How can I help you?" "My name is Ruth Calloway," I said. "I own the brick building at the far end, the one with the faded gold letters. I hope to apply." Something moved in her face when I said the address. Not pity. "Recognition, Calloway's," she said. "The dress shop. My mother had her mother of the bride dress made there. Must be 25 years ago now. Pale gold. She still has it in a garment bag. She won't let me give it away." She came around the desk. "You made that dress?" "If it was pale gold and it fit her better than anything she ever bought," I said, "then yes, ma'am. I believe I did. I remember the color. I had to order that fabric special." Miss Foster looked at me for a moment, and then she did a thing that undid 4 years of a man telling me I was finished. She put out her hand, and she shook mine, and she said, "It is an honor to meet you. Let's sit down and do this right." We sat at her little table, and she did not talk down to me, and she did not talk up an easy hope either, which I respected even more. She was honest about the process. There was a review committee of 7, she said, some from the county, some from the foundation putting up the matching money, a banker, an architect, 2 business owners, a woman from the Historical Society. They would score every application on need, feasibility, community benefit, and the strength of the applicant to actually carry it out. There was more money asked for than there was money to give. Not everyone would be funded. Some very nice people with very nice ideas would be turned away, and she would have to be the one to make those calls. But she did not enjoy that part, and she told me so plainly. "I won't tell you it's a sure thing," she said. "It isn't. But I will tell you this. Most of what crosses my desk is a dream with no floor under it. People who love the idea of a business and have never run one. What you're handing me," and she rested her hand flat on my folder, "is the opposite problem. This is a proven business, with 40 years of history and a building already owned free and clear. If your books are half as good as your reputation, Mrs. Calloway, you are exactly the kind of applicant this program was created to find. So do me a favor. Don't sell yourself short in that room if you're invited to present. I've watched people talk themselves out of money they'd already earned." I told her I would try. Then I asked her the question I had been carrying. "Miss Foster, if a person came to you and said a member of my family was trying to talk me out of applying, was calling it a fantasy, was pressuring me to sign my building over to him instead, would that person be a fool to keep going?" She was quiet a moment. She had a good quiet, a listening one. "Mrs. Calloway," she said, "I have been doing this work for 11 years, and I have learned to pay attention when somebody's family fights hard to keep them from applying for their own money. In my experience, it usually means one of 2 things. Either they're afraid you'll fail and be hurt," she paused, "or they're afraid you'll succeed and stop needing them. Only you know which one you're dealing with. But I'll say this. Nobody who was truly trying to protect you would ever ask you to give away the one thing that makes you safe. I have thought about those words more times than I can count. Nobody who is truly trying to protect you asks you to give away the one thing that makes you safe." I wanted to write them on the wall of my kitchen. Instead, I thanked her, and I left my folder in her good hands, and I drove home lighter than I had come, past my own faded letters, and I did a thing I had not let myself do in view of the building in 4 years. I made a promise to it, out loud, through the windshield. "Hold on," I told it. "Your Ruth is coming back." That evening Simone came by to pick up Imani's church shoes. She came alone, which was its own kind of message, and she stood in my kitchen with her coat still on, as you stand when you have told your husband you will only be a minute. "Mama," she said, "Trevor told me what you're doing. Did he tell it straight?" She looked at the floor. "He said you're throwing your savings at a fantasy. He said the grant thing is a long shot and you're going to be humiliated when they say no. He said you're too proud to let him help." She lifted her eyes finally, and they were her father's eyes, wet at the corners, and I could see the war going on behind them. "Mama, are you? Being too proud? Because I'm scared for you. I lie awake scared for you." I took my daughter's cold hands in my warm ones, and I held them as I used to hold them when she was small and the thunder frightened her, and I said, "Baby, let me ask you one thing, and I ask you to answer it as my daughter and not as his wife. In all the years you knew your father, In all the years you watched me run that shop, did you ever once see either of us handle money in a way that shamed this family? No, she whispered. Never. Then whose judgment about money are you being asked to trust over ours right now? Mine and your father's 40 years? Or a man whose fund you have never seen a statement from? Who needs my building so badly he calls it saving me? I squeezed her hands. I am not asking you to choose sides against your husband, Simone. I would never make you do that. I am only asking you to keep your own eyes open. That is all. Keep your own eyes open and watch what happens, and decide for yourself who here has been telling you the truth. She did not answer me. She took Amani's shoes, and she kissed my cheek, and there were tears on her face when she did it, and she left. But she had heard me. I knew my girl. She had heard me. And she was going to start watching. And once Simone Calloway started truly watching a thing, she never could unsee what was there. The waiting is the part nobody warns you about. I had spent 40 years in a trade where the work is the answer to the fear. You cut, you pin, you stitch, and by evening there is a finished thing on the form to prove you existed. But an application is a letter you drop into a well, and then you stand at the top of the well and wait for a sound, and the well keeps its own time. October went. The trees on Main Street turned the color of the fabric I used to save for autumn weddings. I prayed, and I mended things around the house that did not need mending just to keep my hands from shaking. And I truly did not call Miss Foster, because a woman who calls every day to ask if she has been chosen has already told them she does not trust the work to speak for her. Then, on a Wednesday, the phone rang, and it was Delia Foster, and her voice had a careful brightness in it that I have since learned is the sound of an official who is not allowed to promise you anything, but very much wants to. Mrs. Calloway, she said, the committee has reviewed the written applications, and they've moved a shortlist forward to in-person presentations. You're on it. They'd like you to come speak to them, 15 minutes, 2 weeks from Thursday, in the county chambers. Bring whatever helps you tell your story. And Mrs. Calloway, she dropped her voice. Bring the books. The real ones. The banker on the committee has been doing this 30 years, and he has never once seen 40 years of hand-kept ledgers with his own eyes. Let him. I hung up the phone, and I sat down in my kitchen chair, and I will not pretend I was calm, because my heart was going like a girl's. Then, I did the only thing that has ever steadied me. I got out my sewing kit, and over the next 2 weeks I made myself a new dress for that room. Not the funeral suit this time. A dress. Deep blue, the color of a choir robe, cut clean and strong, with covered buttons I made by hand, one at a time, as my mother showed me when I was 9 years old and could barely hold the fabric. Every button was a small prayer. By the time I had made the last one, I was not afraid of that room anymore, because I was going to walk into it wearing 40 years of my own hands. Trevor found out about the presentation. Of course he did. Simone could not keep a secret from her own husband, and I simply did not ask her to. He called me the night before, and this time there was no laughing. "Ruth," he said, and his voice was tight as a drum, "I need you to not do this." "I know you do," I said. "You don't understand. I have investors. I have people I've made commitments to based on collateral I told them I could bring to the table. If you stand up in the sight of half the county tomorrow and announce you're reopening that building, it becomes public that it's not available, and that puts me in an impossible position. Do you understand what you're doing to me, to Simone, to your own granddaughter's future?" And there it was, laid bare at last, in his own frightened voice on my telephone the night before the biggest morning of my late life. He had already promised my building to strangers. He had sold a thing that was never his. And now the true owner was about to stand up in public and take it back, and he was calling that theft. "Trevor," I said, and I kept my voice as soft as I could, because a soft voice is the only kind he could not shout over. "I am about to tell you something my husband told me, and I would have you hear it and not just wait for me to finish so you can talk." Elijah used to say that a man who builds his house on another person's land will spend his whole life afraid of a knock on the door. You built your house on my land. You did it without asking, and the knock you are hearing is not me being cruel to you. It is just the true owner coming home. I am sorry that it frightens you, but I did not put you on my land. You did that. And I will not stay off my own ground one more day to keep your fear comfortable. He hung up on me. I said a prayer for him, which surprised me. And I meant it, which surprised me more. And then I slept like a stone, the deepest sleep I had had in months, because I had finally said the whole truth out loud to the one person who most needed to hear it. And the truth, once it is out of you, does not keep you awake as the swallowing of it does. The county chambers are a big cold room with a long curved desk up front and a little table down below where the person speaking sits, looking up as you look up at a doctor or a judge. I came early. I wore my blue dress. I set my 3 oldest ledgers on the table in plain sight of me, squared, and I folded my hands on top of them. And one by one the 7 members of the committee came in and took their seats above me, and I looked up at them, and I was not afraid. And I wish to tell you exactly what happened in that room, because it is the hinge on which my whole life turned. Miss Foster introduced me. Then the chairwoman, a kind-faced older woman from the Historical Society, invited me to make my case. And I surely did not make a case. I told them the truth, which is a different and stronger thing. "I am Ruth Calloway," I said. "Across 40 years, I ran a dress and alterations shop in the building at the end of Main Street. My husband and I bought it when nobody wanted that block, and we paid it off, and it is mine, free and clear. And I have brought the proof. I did not bring you a business plan built on a hope. I brought you 40 years of a business that already worked. I opened the oldest ledger and I turned it around so the banker could see it. This is the first page. A hem for a woman named Pearl. 40 cents. 1983. And every page after it. For 40 years. In my hand. And my late husband's hand. Every dollar that came in and every dollar that went out, and not one of them ever unaccounted for. Because I tithed the first 10th off the top every week of my life, and a woman who answers to God for her first dollar learns to answer for all the rest. The banker, a heavy silver-haired man who had come in looking like he had read 1,000 of these and been moved by none, leaned forward. He reached across and he turned a few pages himself, slow, and the whole room went quiet watching him, and when he looked up his face had changed. "Mrs. Calloway," he said, "in 31 years of banking, I have asked 10,000 people for their financials, and I have never once been handed 40 years of clean books kept by hand." He tapped the page. "This is the most honest document that has ever crossed this desk. I want that on the record." I thanked him. Then the architect, a young man with paint under his fingernails, asked me the hard question, and I was glad he asked it, because it was the right one. "Mrs. Calloway, the numbers are beautiful. But you closed 4 years ago. The world changed. There's a mall, there's online shopping. Forgive me. But why would this trade come back now?" I had waited my whole application for someone to ask me that, and I answered him from the deepest part of what I knew. "Young man, That mall out on the highway can sell a woman a dress. It cannot fit her. It cannot sit with a bride whose mother has just passed and let out a gown so her aunt can stand in her mother's place. It cannot dress a body that chemotherapy has changed, gently, without a mirror, so a woman can feel like herself at her own daughter's wedding. I did that for 40 years, and the machine on the highway has never done it once, and it never will, because it is a machine, and this is a ministry that happens to charge for thread. The need did not go away when I closed. The need has been standing on that sidewalk for 4 years, knocking on a locked door. I am only asking you to help me unlock it. The room was very quiet. The chairwoman had her hand pressed to her mouth. And then something happened that I did not arrange, because I would not have known how. A woman stood up in the back of the chambers, an older woman I half recognized, and she said, "May I speak?" And before anyone could rule on whether she was allowed, she said, "This woman made my wedding dress in 1991 and my daughter's in 2016 out of the same lace. Because I saved it. Because I knew Ruth would still be there. She was always still there. I drove down here today just in case somebody needed to say that out loud." And she sat back down, and she folded her hands, and a couple of other people in the chamber I had not even noticed nodded like they had come for the same reason. I did not yet know they were coming. Word travels on our side of town as it always has. Mouth to mouth, church to porch. And some of the women I had dressed across 40 years had heard that Ruth Calloway was standing up in the county chambers, and they had put on their coats and come to stand behind me without my asking. That is a kind of wealth Trevor never had a word for on any of his balance sheets. I did not weep. I had promised myself I would not weep in that room. But it was close, and I have never in my life felt richer than I did looking up at that committee with my own people quietly filling the seats behind me. The chairwoman thanked me. She told me the committee would deliberate and that Miss Foster would be in touch within the month. 15 minutes, they had said, and I had used every one. I gathered my 3 ledgers, and I squared their edges, and I walked out past the women who had come, and I touched each of their hands, and not one word needed saying. Then I drove home, and I got down on my knees, and this time I did not ask for the grant. I thanked God for the room, because whatever the committee decided, I had already been given the thing I had truly gone in there to find, which was the plain sight of my own worth reflected back at me in the faces of people who had no reason to lie. Now, while I was on my knees giving thanks, Trevor was beginning to drown in earnest, and I still did not know the half of it yet, but Simone did. Because Simone had started watching, exactly as I had asked her to. She told me all of it later, and I will tell it to you as she told it to me, sitting at that same table with her coat off this time, staying more than a minute. She said it started with the mail. Envelopes with red printing on them, the kind that shout before you open them, and Trevor snatching them off the counter before she could read them. She said it moved to the phone calls he took in the garage with the door closed, his voice going high and pleading in a way she had never heard from him in 6 years of marriage. She said one night a man she did not know came to their door, not angry, worse than angry, tired, and asked to speak to Trevor about his money. And Trevor took him out to the driveway, and Simone watched through the window as her husband did all the talking with his hands, while the tired man just shook his head. Slow. Over and over. No. 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 "Mama," she said, "I did what you told me. I kept my own eyes open. And one afternoon he left his laptop open on the counter, and I wasn't snooping, I promise you. It was just there. And there was a spreadsheet." She pressed her lips together. "Mama, the fund isn't tripling. It isn't even holding. There's almost $400,000 of other people's money in there, and it's mostly gone. He's been paying the old investors with the new investors' money. I looked up what that's called. I looked it up in the library, like you would have. Her voice broke. It has a name, Mama. It's not a strategy. It's the thing they put people in prison for. And he needed your building because a real asset in the fund, something paid off and worth real money, was the only thing that could make the numbers look solid enough to bring in one more big investor and keep the whole thing from falling in on itself. She looked at me. Wrecked. You were the log he wanted to throw on the fire. And I almost helped him hand you to it. I almost helped him. Mama, my own mother. I came around the table, and I held my daughter while she cried the hard cry, the one that shakes the whole body, and I really did not say I told you so. Because I have not once in my years met a person who was made better by hearing those 4 words, and because a mother's arms are not a place where scores get settled. They are a place where the wound gets to bleed clean. So I let her bleed clean. Trevor came to me one last time. It was a cold evening near the end of November, and when I opened my door he was standing there without his watch, and I noticed that right away a man will sell the thing he used to shine at you first. And the pale band of skin on his wrist told me more than anything he said that night. The smile was gone. The loudness was gone. What stood on my porch was just a frightened young man who had built his house on sand and felt the tide coming, and God forgive me, for one moment I pitied him more than I have ever pitied anyone. "Ruth," he said, "can I come in?" I let him in. I sat him down. I poured him coffee, because my mother raised me to know that you do not let even your enemy sit in your kitchen without something warm in his hands. And while it was still too hot to drink, he started to talk, fast, low. The words of a man running out of road. "I'm in trouble," he said. "Real trouble. I made some mistakes. I got in over my head. I was trying to do right by the family, and it got away from me. But I can still fix it. I can still make everybody whole. I just need a little more time and a little more." He stopped, and he could not even say it, and I watched him not be able to say the word building. A little more support. From the people who love me. "Ruth, if you'd just sign, even now, even temporarily, it would buy me the room to make it right. And nobody would ever have to know how close it came. Simone would never have to know." And there it stood, the last card, the ugliest one, played soft. Simone would not ever have to know. He did not realize that Simone already knew everything, that she had told me at that very table 2 nights before. He was offering to sell me my daughter's ignorance in exchange for my building, not understanding that the thing he was selling was already gone. I could have told him so. I could have watched his face fall. I did not, and here is why, for it is the heart of everything I believe. It was not my mercy to give. Simone's knowing or not knowing was between Simone and her own marriage, and it was no chip for me to play at my own table, not even against a man who had earned a hard reckoning. So I held that card too, and I set it down gently, face down, and I gave him the only thing I honestly had. "Trevor," I said, "I am not going to sign my building over to you. Not tonight, not temporarily, not ever. That was never going to save you, son, and I think in the deep place you already know it. All my building could do is put my name on a fire I did not light, so that when it finally burned I would go down with you. I refuse to do that. But I will tell you what I will do." He looked up. "I will pray for you. Every day. I will pray that you find the courage to go to those people yourself and tell them the truth before it gets any worse. because the truth told late is still better than the truth dug up. And I will love my daughter and my granddaughter through whatever is coming, with everything I have, which is more than you think, because it was never in a bank. That is what I have to offer you. It is not what you came for. But it is the only thing I own that has ever been worth anything, and I am offering you all of it. He left without drinking the coffee. He did not slam the door. He just went quiet, quieter than I had ever seen him, and drove away. And I stood at my window and watched his leased taillights go down my street. And I prayed for him then, out loud, alone in my kitchen. And I meant every word. And if that surprises you, then you and I understand grace differently. And I would gently ask you to stay with me. Because the reason I could pray for the man who tried to sink me is the whole reason this story is worth your evening. Then came the hardest stretch. The waiting turned mean. December came, and the month Miss Foster had promised came and went with no call, and the not knowing began to work on me as water works on stone. Word got around town, as word does, and one version of the word that reached my ears at the grocery store was that the big grant money was as good as promised to a coffee company from out of state that wanted to put one of their shops on the corner, all glass and noise, and that the little applications from local folks were just there to make the process look fair. I do not know if that rumor was true. I know it sat on my chest like a hand. I know I lay awake and did the arithmetic of my own foolishness. All the savings I had spent on bids and code reports and copies. All the hope I had let myself carry at my age. And I heard Trevor's voice in the dark saying, "You're going to embarrass yourself in full view of the whole town." And for the first time I was afraid he had been right. I went to Pastor Hollis. I did not go to be talked out of my fear. I went because sometimes you need another person to hold the far end of your faith when your own arms get tired. He listened to all of it, the rumor, the waiting, the arithmetic of foolishness, and when I was done he did not give me a sermon. He asked me one question. "Ruth," he said, "when you stood up in that chamber and those women stood up behind you, did you feel finished then?" "No," I said. "I felt more alive than I had in years." "Then you already got your grant," he said. "The money is a separate question, and it is in hands higher than that committee's. But whether they fund you or not, you have already reopened. Ruth, you reopened the day you put your key in that lock, and it turned. Everything after that is just the Lord deciding how big to make the yes. And a yes that only comes when you can see the whole staircase is not faith. It is just good eyesight." He smiled. "You have never once in your life needed to see the whole staircase. You have always just needed to see the next step, and you have always taken it, in an apron, one straight stitch after another. Take the next step. Let him worry about the size of the yes." I went home. I got on my knees. And that night, for once in weeks, I gave the whole thing over. Truly gave it. The building and the money and the rumor and Trevor and Simone and my own fear of looking a fool. And I slept. And the very next morning, while I was standing at my stove making one egg for one person as I had every morning for 11 years, the telephone rang. I turned off the burner. I wiped my hands on my apron. I picked up the phone, and I said hello. And it was Delia Foster. And this time there was no careful brightness holding her voice in check. This time her voice was shaking a little, as a person's voice shakes when they have been trusted to carry good news and can barely hold the size of it. "Mrs. Calloway," she told me. "It's Delia. Are you sitting down? I must have you sit down." I sat down in my kitchen chair. "I'm sitting, Miss Foster. The committee met last night. It was not close, Mrs. Calloway. out of everyone who applied, out of every plan and dream that came across my desk this year, they voted 7-0 to award the full grant to you." She took a breath, and I heard it catch. The full amount, all of it. Everything you asked for, down to the dollar, to restore the building and reopen Callaway's. The banker asked that the minutes reflect that in his 31 years he had never seen a stronger applicant. The chairwoman cried. I am not supposed to tell you that part, so please don't repeat it, but she cried. And then I cried, and I have been doing this for 11 years. Her voice broke wide open now. "Mrs. Callaway, you got it. You got all of it. Your Ruth is coming back." I did not say anything for a long moment, because I could not. I sat in the chair my husband used to sit in the kitchen we paid off together, holding the phone with both hands, and I looked out the window at the ordinary morning. The same street, the same bare December trees, and I understood that the world had just changed shape, and had not bothered to look any different while it did it. That entire sum. A room full of strangers had sat around a table and read 40 years of my honest hand, and they had said my worth out loud, and the number they said was larger than anything I had ever dared to want, and they were putting it into my 2 hands so that I could rise. Not so I could get even, so I could rise. There is a whole world of difference between those two, and I had my hand on it now. "Miss Foster," I finally said, and my own voice was not steady either. "Would you say that to me one more time?" Slow. I have waited a long time to hear a thing like that said about me out loud. And that good woman said it again. Slow. Every word of it, the amount in my name together, awarded to Ruth Callaway. And I closed my eyes and I let it wash over me like water at a baptism. And when I opened them again, I was not a widow with a dead building anymore. I was a woman with a trade and a future, and the means to reach it, and I was 63 years old, and I was just getting started. There is more. Delia told me the board did not want to simply mail me a check. The revitalization program lived or died on the town believing in it, she said, and there was nothing the town needed to see more than a local woman with 40 years of history getting her building back on her feet. So they wanted to do it in the open. They wanted to hold a presentation on Main Street, before my own shop, in the new year, when the weather turned, and they would present the award in view of the whole community and cut a ribbon on the building the same day, so that the first thing anyone saw of the new Main Street was Ruth Callaway's door coming open again. A public ceremony. My name, and my worth, and my husband's gold letters, all of it out loud, in the daylight, where everyone who had ever passed that locked door could stand and witness it. I said yes. Of course I said yes. But I will be truthful about the shape of my yes, because it matters to the whole meaning of this. I did not say yes because I wanted a crowd to see Trevor humbled. By then I already knew, from Simone, that Trevor's own reckoning was coming on its own schedule, with or without me, and that a public ceremony for me would land in the same season his fund finally went under, and I would not pretend I had no way to know those two things would sit side by side in the town's mind. I knew. But I did not build that. I only refused to hide from my own good news to keep his bad news comfortable, which is a thing I had already promised him I would not do. The daylight was not a weapon I aimed at him. It was just the daylight. And I had spent long enough standing in the dark. I called Simone first. When I told her the number, she screamed, a real scream, joy this time, and I heard little Amani in the background ask what was wrong, and I heard my daughter scoop up my granddaughter and say, "Nothing's wrong, baby. Everything's right. Your Gigi did the most amazing thing," and I had to sit down all over again. Then Simone got quiet, and she said, "Mama, I'm going to be there." At the ceremony. In the front. And I need to tell you something, and I need Trevor to not be the reason I say it, or don't say it, so I'm just going to say it. I'm proud of you. I have been so busy being scared for you that I forgot to just be proud of you, and you are the strongest person I have ever known, and I'm sorry it took me this long to stand where I should have been standing the whole time. I told my daughter, I love you, baby. There is no clock on coming home. And the front row will be waiting for you. I called Pastor Hollis next, and by that evening the whole church knew. Because you cannot tell Pastor Hollis a thing and expect it to stay told to only him. And the phone rang all night with women who had stood behind me in the chamber, and women who had not been able to come but had prayed, and every one of them said some version of the same thing. We always knew. Ruth, we always knew. And I let them say it, though I did not correct them. Even though the truth is that I had not always known, that I had lain awake doing the arithmetic of my own foolishness only a week before. Because that is what a congregation is for. They hold the knowing for you on the nights you cannot hold it yourself, and then they hand it back to you on the morning it comes true, and they call it, we always knew. And it is the kindest lie in the world, and it is also, in the only way that finally matters, completely true. That winter I worked harder than I had worked since I was a young woman, and I never have in all my born days been so happy to be tired. The grant did not come as one lump you could go crazy with. It came in stages, as a wise gift does, tied to the work getting done and inspected, and Delia Foster walked me through every stage with a patience that never once made me feel slow. First, the building. The electricians came and pulled out the wiring Elijah had always meant to fix and never got the chance to, and I stood inside the dust and told the young foreman where every outlet needed to be. Because I knew that shop as I knew my own hands, where the light had to fall for close work, where a woman on the fitting stool needed a mirror and where she needed a wall so she would not have to watch herself grieve. The town did a thing I did not expect. Men from the church came on Saturdays and would not take pay, and painted the pressed tin ceiling, and re-hung the door so it swung true again. A retired sign painter who had known Elijah climbed a ladder, a steadier one than the first, and re-gilded the gold letters over the window. Callaway's, brighter than they had ever been. And when he was done, he would not take money for that either. He just stood in the street looking up at his work with his cap in his hand and said, Elijah painted these the year my boy was born. I wasn't going to let anybody but me put the gold back. And I held the bottom of that ladder, and I prayed, the same as I had almost 40 years before, and the circle of it closed so cleanly that I had to go inside for a minute and be alone with my God. The trade found me before the paint was even dry. One afternoon, with sawdust still on the floor, a man knocked on the propped-open door. An older gentleman in a good but tight suit, hat in his hand. Ruth Callaway, he said. They told me down at the barber shop you were open again. Not open yet, I said. I'm still standing in the sawdust, Mr. Pruitt. Well, he said, turning red, my grandson's graduating Saturday, and I have put on some prosperity since my wife passed. God rest her, and there is not a soul left who knows how to let a man out without making him look like a stuffed sausage. You were the only one who ever did it right. I looked at that proud, embarrassed man in his too tight jacket, and I felt the whole reason for everything come back into my hands at once. Take the coat off and stand on that stool, I said. The one that isn't covered in plaster. You'll do it? Before Saturday? Mr. Pruitt, I have been letting out grieving men's Sunday coats since before your grandson was a thought. Saturday is nothing. Stand up straight for me. He climbed up, and I pinned the back seam, and I could feel him breathing easier already, the ease a man finds once he trusts the hands behind him. "How much do I owe you?" he asked. "You owe me nothing today," I said. "You are my first customer in 4 years. You owe me the pleasure of watching your grandson cross that stage in a coat that fits. Pay me next time." There is going to be a next time now. He came down off that stool with water in his eyes, and he shook my hand with both of his, and he said, "Thank God you came back, Ruth." And I told him God had very little to do with my stubbornness, but a great deal to do with the rest. And we both laughed. And that was the first laugh those walls had heard in 4 long years. Simone came every weekend. She brought Imani, who was given the great and serious job of sorting buttons into jars by color, and my granddaughter took to it as I once had. And I watched 3 generations of Callaway hands moving in that shop, and I understood that some inheritances do skip the bank entirely and land exactly where they are meant to. Simone learned to run the register I had ordered, and she was good at it, and one afternoon she looked up from the books, my books. The new clean pages started fresh, and she said, "Mama, you were doing this by hand for 40 years? This is real. This is a real business." He told me it was a hobby. She did not have to say who he was. She just shook her head and went back to the column, adding it up correctly, and I let the silence answer her. Because while my building rose, Trevor's fell, and it fell in public, and I take no joy in the falling, but I do not mean to pretend it did not happen, since it is the plain truth of that season. And you deserve the plain truth. The tired men who had come to his door stopped coming quietly. There were letters now with the county's return address on them. And then there was a notice in the legal section of the paper that Simone read aloud to me at my new counter, with her hand shaking. Words about his fund and its investors, and an inquiry. And then the big investor he had been chasing, the one he had needed my building to reel in, walked away for good. Simone told me she was there the afternoon the last hope died, when Trevor sat at their own kitchen table with his laptop and refreshed his screen over and over, waiting for a wire that was never going to come, and finally there was an email, and she watched over his shoulder without him knowing, and the subject line was 2 words. Funding denied. That was all. 2 words, the mirror image of the 2 words a committee of strangers had said about me. She said he sat there a long time, and then he closed the laptop very gently, as gently as he had closed it the night he left my porch, and he did not shout. And somehow the not shouting was the worst thing she had ever seen. Let me say clearly what I said to Simone that day, because a lot of people in my shoes would have felt something sweet in that moment. Yet I did not want my daughter to carry sweetness about her own husband's ruin, no matter what he had done. "Baby," I told her, "a man losing everything is not good news, not even when the man earned it. What is happening to Trevor is sad. It is the sad, straight result of the choices he made, and it is not our doing, and it is not our celebration. You can hold 2 things at once. You can be proud of your mother and grieved for your husband in the very same hour, and if you feel both, that only means your heart is still working as God built it. Do not let anybody, including me, tell you that you have to pick one feeling. You do not. You just have to be square about both." She cried again, but it was a cleaner cry than the first one, the kind that has some peace mixed into the salt. And then she asked me the question I think she had been holding for weeks. "Mama, I don't know if I can stay married to him. Not because he lost the money. Because of what he was willing to do to you to keep it. That's the part I can't get around. He looked you in the face and told you that you'd die poor and alone. And he did it so you'd be scared enough to hand him the sole thing that was truly yours. What kind of man does that to his wife's mother?" I did not answer that question for her, because it was not mine to answer, and a mother who chooses her daughter's marriage for her in either direction has stopped being a mother and started being a puppeteer. I only held her, and I said, "Whatever you decide, you and Imani have a home here, with clean books and gold letters and a whole congregation standing behind you. There is no storm on this earth that a woman with somewhere safe to stand cannot outlast." Then I put her back to work on the buttons with her daughter, because grief needs a job to do with its hands as much as joy does, and I had learned that in this very shop a long time ago. The ceremony was set for a Saturday in the early spring, when the light comes back to Main Street long and golden in the late afternoon, and Delia Foster called me the week before to walk me through how it would go. And she told me one more thing near the end of the call, that she said she was probably not supposed to tell me, but that she was going to tell me anyway, woman to woman. "Mrs. Calloway," she went on, "a man came to my office last month, your son-in-law. Trevor, I never said anything," and she went on. "He asked to speak to me privately about your application. He implied there were things I should know about your judgment, your age, your fitness to manage a project this size. He was very smooth about it. He suggested it might be safer for everyone if the funds went to an entity with more, in his words, professional oversight, one he could help set up." She let that sit. "I do want you to know what I told him, because you should never have to wonder whether your own worth was defended in a room you weren't in. I told him that in 11 years of this work, the single clearest sign that an applicant deserves the grant is when a relative shows up trying to get their hands on it. I told him the committee had already read 40 years of your books, and that they trusted your judgment considerably more than they trusted his, given that he'd arrived uninvited to undermine an elder in his own family. And then I asked him to leave, and I put a note in the file, and I truly want you to know it's there, in your file, in writing. Forever. Nobody got to say a word against you in the dark that I didn't answer in the light." I thanked her, and I sat with the phone in my lap a long while after she hung up, because I understood that this woman, this straight-dealing stranger, had stood in a doorway and defended my name to a man who shared my daughter's bed, and had asked nothing for it, and had not even told me until now. The official world, the impersonal machinery Trevor was so sure would only ever respect a man in a nice suit, had looked at him and looked at me and chosen me, out loud, in a closed office, with no crowd to perform for. That is the thing I most want you to carry away from my whole story. The vindication that matters is not the one with an audience. It is the one that happens in the room you are not even in, when a person of integrity decides, with nothing to gain, that your worth is real. The ceremony was just the daylight catching up to a decision that had already been made in the dark by good people doing right. The Saturday came bright. I do want to give it to you exactly as I was standing in it, because I had waited my whole life for a day I could not know I was allowed to want, and I do not intend to rush past it now. Main Street was closed to cars for 2 blocks. They had set up a little platform in the sight of my shop, and folding chairs, and a ribbon across my door. A wide green ribbon, the color of new money and new leaves both, and the gold letters over the window blazed in the afternoon sun so bright you had to squint at them. Calloway's Reborn. There were more people than chairs. There were the women who had stood behind me in the chamber, in their good hats. There was Pastor Hollis in his best suit, and half the choir. There were customers I had not seen in years, holding the hands of grandchildren who had been fitted for christening gowns in my shop before they could walk. Simone sat in the front row in a dress I had made her, with Imani on her lap in a little yellow dress I had made too, and my daughter's face was turned up to me like a sunflower, and there was no fear left in it anywhere. The chairwoman spoke. The banker spoke next. He held up no notes at all, and he said, "I have been a banker in this county for 31 years, and I have read more financial statements than any man should have to. And I am here to tell you, neighbors, that the most honest set of books ever handed across my desk was kept by this woman. By hand, in an apron, across 4 decades, and not a single dollar of it ever went astray. She is the safest bet this town has ever placed. And the crowd made a warm, rising sound. And then Delia Foster stood up with a folder in her hands, an official folder, heavy cream paper, and she called me up to the platform, and I climbed the 2 steps in my blue dress with the hand-covered buttons, and she opened the folder, and she read it out loud, so that all of Main Street could hear. By the authority of the Main Street Revitalization Program and its foundation partners, she read, "This grant, in the amount of $250,000, is awarded to Ruth Calloway, proprietor of Calloway's, for the restoration and reopening of her trade in service to this community." And she turned the letter around and held it up, and there, at the bottom, was the seal. A great embossed circle pressed deep into the cream paper, gold and green, catching the light, real, mine, and under it my own name in ink. And Delia Foster put that letter into my own hands, in plain sight of the whole town. Yet she did not let go right away. She held the other side of it for 1 extra second and looked me in the eye and said, "Quiet. Just for me, your worth, Mrs. Calloway, in writing." Out loud. Finally, and then she let go, and it was mine. I can tell you when I saw Trevor. He was at the very back, at the edge of the crowd, near the corner, where a man stands when he is not sure he is allowed to be somewhere. He had come. I do not fully know why. Maybe Simone had told him where she would be with his daughter. Maybe some part of him needed to see with his own eyes the thing he had been so certain could never happen. The old woman he had told would end my days broke and alone, standing on a platform in the sun with $250,000 of institutional faith in her 2 hands. He was holding his phone, and even from that distance I could see he kept glancing down at it, and Simone told me afterward what was on it, because she had seen the same email come to her own phone that very morning, the county closing its inquiry. His fun finished. The last door shut. He stood at the back of my Triumph, reading the 2 words that ended him. Funding denied, while the whole street heard the great sum that raised me up. I looked at him. Our eyes met across all those happy heads. And I mean to tell you what I did, because a lot of people expect this to be the moment I had earned, the moment to let my face say what my mouth never had. I did not do it. I gave him the smallest nod, not a triumphant one, not a cruel one, the kind of nod you give a person to let them know you have seen them and you are not going to pretend you have not, and that you wish them no further harm than the harm they have already walked themselves into. That was all. Then I turned back to my people, and I picked up the big scissors, my own good German shears that had cut 40 years of cloth, because Delia had asked me what I wanted to cut the ribbon with, and I had told her I would bring my own. And I set the blades against that wide green ribbon. I said a few words first. I had not planned them, and I will never pretend they came out as smooth as I am telling them now, because there were tears in them, mine and the crowd's both. But the heart of what I said was this. 40 years ago my husband painted these letters on a ladder that wobbled, and I steadied the foot of it and prayed. 11 years ago I buried him, and 4 years ago I locked this door and told myself I was finished. I was not finished. I long to say that to anybody out there who has been told they are finished. By a person, or by a year, or by their own tired heart. You are not finished until the Lord says so, and He has never once said so through the mouth of somebody who wanted what you had. This shop was never a dead building. It was just a light somebody switched off for a season. Watch what happens when you switch it back on. And I cut the ribbon, It fell in 2 green pieces into the hands of the children in the front, and Simone reached inside the door and threw the switch, and the whole front of Callaway's came up warm in gold all at once. The new fixtures I had placed exactly where the light needed to fall, and the window glowed, and the dress form stood in it, dressed in the first gown of the new shop, and the bolts of fabric I had never been able to sell stood stacked and bright behind the glass, and the gold letters burned over all of it. Main Street had not seen that window lit in 4 years. A sound went up from the crowd that I felt in my chest before I heard it with my ears, and my granddaughter shouted, "Gigi, it's like a birthday cake." And it was, baby. It was exactly like a birthday cake. The whole storefront blazing like 63 candles lit at once, and I stood on the sidewalk in the last of the golden light, and I let myself weep at last, in full view of everyone. Because I had earned the right to, and because some tears are a kind of praise. The first person through the door of the reopened shop was not a customer. It was my daughter. Simone set Amani down, and she walked up to me on that crowded sidewalk, and she took both my hands as I had taken hers in my kitchen all those months before, and she said, loud enough for the people near us to hear, because she had decided she was done saying important things quietly. "Mama, I am so sorry. I stood within the wrong place for too long. I let a man tell me you were behind the times when you were 40 years ahead of him. I let him make me scared of the strongest woman I know. It stops today. I am with you. Before everybody, in view of God, I am with you, and I always should have been." I took my daughter's face in my 2 hands, right there on the crowded sidewalk, and I let my grief show, plain, for once. "Baby," I said, "you were never in the wrong place. You were in a hard place, and a hard place and a wrong place are not the same thing, and I refuse to let you spend 1 more year confusing them. You hear me? You came. You came before God and this whole street, and that is all your mother ever needed from anybody. Now dry your face. We have a shop to open, and your daughter is going to want to watch her Gigi cut a ribbon, and I am not about to do it with the 2 of us looking a mess." She laughed then, wet and sudden, and she wiped her cheeks with the back of her hand, and she said, "Yes, Mama." 2 small words I had waited a long, hard year to hear said like that, soft and sure, and finally home. I want badly for you to understand what that was, because this was not a small thing dressed up as a big one. My daughter had come home, not to a house, to a truth. She had spent 6 years learning to go quiet when a loud man got louder, and she had just, in public, in the sunshine, on the street where I had raised her, chosen to be loud on the side of what was right. Delia Foster told me later that in all her years of ceremonies, that was the moment she never forgot. Not the check, not the seal, but the daughter walking across the sidewalk to stand beside her mother while the whole town watched. "That is the reversal that actually matters," she said. "The money reopens a shop. That reopens a family." Trevor was gone by then. I looked for him when the crowd began to thin, not to say anything, only because in all my years I have not been able to fully rest while another soul stands outside in the cold of their own making. But the corner, where he had stood, was empty. He had slipped away sometime between the ribbon and the lights, as a man leaves when he finally understands that the room has stopped being about him and is never going to be about him again. I did not chase him. Simone did not chase him. There would be time for the hard conversations that a marriage in that much trouble requires, and those would happen behind their own closed doors, in their own time, with counsel, as such things should. But the ceremony was not the place for his reckoning, and I was glad in the end that he took his reckoning somewhere private, because a man deserves to fall apart out of the sight of the child who calls him daddy, and Imani did not need to watch it, and she still did not. And I thank God for that small mercy in the middle of a hard season. That evening, after the platform was taken down and the folding chairs were folded, and the last of the well-wishers had hugged my neck and gone home, I stayed in the shop alone for a while with the lights on. I walked the floor as I used to at the close of a long day 40 years ago. I ran my hand along the counter. I straightened the gown on the dress form, though it did not need straightening, and I stood at the window and looked out at Main Street coming back to life in the dusk, the other storefronts the program had reopened, glowing down the block like a strand of light strung by a patient hand, and mine the brightest of them now. And I said out loud, to Elijah, because I have not once stopped talking to Elijah, and I am too old to be ashamed of it, well, I braced the base of the ladder one more time. And the letters are back up, and they are brighter than you ever painted them, old man, so don't you come to me in a dream complaining. And I could feel him laughing, wherever he is, as I have felt him laughing at me for 11 years, and I locked my own shop with my own key. The key that it always turned, and I drove home under the streetlights, a woman with a trade again. Callaway's has been open a year now, as I tell you this. I wish to give you a little of the after, because the reopening was the day the town saw. But the year is where the real vindication lives. Quiet, in the work, as it always did. The shop is busier than it was even in the good old years. Because it turns out a town that is remembering how to be a town wants the things a machine cannot give it. Brides come. Their mothers come, and their grandmothers, some of whom I dressed the first time around. A young woman came in last spring, no older than my Simone, with a gown she had bought online, the kind cut for nobody's actual body. She stood on the fitting stool while I pinned, and once the pins came out, the guard came down too, as it always does on that stool. "It's for my wedding," she said, "in June." "Then June is going to be a good month," I said. "Hold still for me, baby." She was quiet a moment. Then she said, "My mom was supposed to help me with this." She passed in February. I did not stop pinning, because I have learned that a woman will say the truest things to a person whose hands are busy and whose eyes are down. "Tell me about her," I said. "What would she have fixed first if she was standing where I'm standing?" And that opened her up like a seam. She told me her mother would have hated the neckline, would have said it was cut too low for church folk, would have marched her back to change it. She laughed while she cried, both at once, and I let her, and I kept working. "This waist is wrong," I said gently. "It's fighting you. Whoever cut this never met you." I pinned it true to her actual body. "There, now it's yours." She looked in the mirror, and for a moment she did not see the empty chair that would be at the front of her wedding. She just saw herself, whole, in a dress that finally fit. "How did you do that?" she whispered. "I didn't do much," I said. "You were already in there. I just took the machine's guesses out of the way." She hugged me in her slip on the stool, and she thanked me like I had done something holy, and maybe, in the only way I have ever known how to, I had. That is the trade. That is what the machine on the highway will never sell. I did not need a grant to know it was worth something. But I refused to lie and say it did not mean the world to have strangers with a seal and a checkbook agree with me out loud after 40 years. Simone works beside me 3 days a week. She kept the books that first year, my clean new pages. And she is better with the computer part than I will ever be. And she has a head for the money that she got from both her parents, and that a loud man once told her she did not have. Watching my daughter discover she is good at the very thing she was made to feel small about has been a joy I did not then know was still coming to me at my age. Imani has graduated from sorting buttons to threading needles, and she says she means to run the shop someday, and I tell her she will have to fight me for it. And she laughs, and I mean it a little, because I am not finished. I keep telling you people I am not finished. As for Trevor, I will share with you what I know and no more, because the rest belongs to him and to my daughter, and is not mine to hand out for an evening story. His fund is gone. There were consequences, official ones, the kind that follow a man who spends other people's money as if it were his own, and he is working through them as a person does, slowly. And some of them will follow him a long time. Simone did not stay married to him. She came to that on her own, with prayer and with counsel and with a great deal of hard nights, and she simply did not do it out of revenge, and I plainly did not push her toward it. And when she finally told me her decision, she was not bitter, only clear. And clear is a better country to live in than bitter, and I was proud of how she got there. Trevor still sees Imani. A child should not lose a father for the father's sins, and Simone has been more gracious about that than many women would have been, and I have told her so. And here is the thing I did not expect. Trevor called me a few months back. He said he had been going to a group, working on himself, and that part of it was making things right with the people he had wronged, and that he owed me an amends. He said he was sorry. He said he had looked at me my whole marriage to his wife and seen an old woman in an apron and never once seen the businesswoman who had run a paid-off enterprise for 40 years, and that his blindness had cost him everything, and that the day he watched me stand on that platform was the day he finally understood what he had thrown away, not the building, but the chance to have been loved by a family that would have caught him if he had ever let them. I told him I forgave him. And let me be careful here, because I know some of you are going to be angry with me for it. I did not forgive Trevor because what he did was small. It was not small. He tried to frighten an old woman out of her one security so he could feed it to a fire he lit. I forgave him because forgiveness was never a gift I was handing Trevor. It was a weight I refused to carry into my new shop. Bitterness is heavy, and I had a business to run, and a granddaughter to teach, and a great many hems to take up. And no free hand left for a grudge against a man already carrying the full consequence of himself. So I set it down. Freedom, not spite. That is the whole of what I chose, every single day of that hard year, and it is the only choice that ever set me free. So that is my story. From the insult at my own dining table to the lights coming up warm in my own window with my own daughter's hand on the switch. I have told it to you as honest as I keep my books, the good weeks and the lean ones both. Because a story you only tell the flattering half of is just another kind of crooked ledger, and I am too old and too tithed to start keeping crooked ledgers now. If there is one thing I would fold up and hand to you to take home, it is this. The world is full of people who will try to price you when they are really only telling you the size of their own fear. Trevor called my building a dead asset because he could not imagine it alive. And he called me broke and alone because he could not imagine me standing, and none of that was ever a report about me. It was a report about the narrowness of what he was able to see. Do not let a person's small eyes become the mirror you dress under the eyes of. Your worth was set by the one who made you, long before any man with a nice watch sat down at your table with a folder. And no committee and no bank and no son-in-law can raise it or lower it by a single dollar. Sometimes, if you are patient and you keep your books straight and your hands busy and your knees ready, the Lord will let a room full of people I had never met say that worth out loud, in daylight, so that you can hear with your own ears what He knew about you all along. But even if that room never comes, the worth was always there. The ceremony did not make me valuable. It only made me heard. Now I promised you at the beginning that I would ask you something at the end, and I keep my promises, so here it is. And I truly want your answer, because I read every comment you leave me, and I have learned as much from you as you could ever learn from an old seamstress. If you had been sitting in my chair that Sunday afternoon, with the folder open before you, and a frightened, smiling man telling you to sign, and your own daughter standing silent by the counter, what would you have done? Would you have signed the papers to keep the peace? To make this easier on everybody, as he asked, telling yourself that keeping the family calm was worth more than keeping the single thing that was truly yours? Or would you have set down the pen and gone home and kept your name on your own life, even if it meant standing alone for a while first? There is no wrong way to answer me. I have loved people who would have signed out of love, and I do not judge them. But I aim to know where you stand, so tell me in the comments, and tell me too where you are watching from tonight, and how old you were when you first learned that the people who love you the loudest are not always the ones who tell you the truth. And if this story sat with you, if you have ever been the one at the table being told what you are worth by somebody who never earned the right to hold that pen, then do this old woman a kindness and subscribe and stay with me, because I have more stories like this one, true and ass, that matter even when the names are changed to protect the tender. And I would count it an honor to keep company with you on the evenings when the house is quiet. There are a great many of us who spent our best years in service that nobody clapped for, and I have grown to believe that we were never invisible to heaven, only to the people who were too busy being served to look up. This little channel is a place where we look up together. Elijah used to close every prayer the same way, and I aim to close ours the same way, because it has never once let me down. Lord, thank you for the work of our hands, for the roof that is paid for the children who come home, and for the light that comes back on. Keep our books straight and our doors open and our hearts free of the weight we were never meant to carry. And when the world tries to tell us what we are worth, let us be too busy doing honest work to hear it until the day you say it yourself. Amen. The gold letters are lit tonight, as they will be lit tomorrow, and Calloway's is open, and Ruth is not finished, and neither, my friend, are you. Sleep well, and come back and see me. I will leave the light on.